Hello, John.
Morning, Tom.
It is good to see you.
It's nice to be seen. I had some internet trouble this morning
Oh dear.
and I called.
Here comes Fred Lawrence.
Good. Long distance.
Long distance.
Hi,
Hello.
Fred.
Hello, Fred. Okay. I'm not sure we can hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Now we can hear you.
Thank you.
And here comes Ned. There is Ned.
Yeah,
Good morning.
Morning,
Good morning.
Fred, John, Tom,
Now I think all we're waiting for is George.
George. Yeah.
And George Farrick is off cavorting with his, grandchildren?
A beautiful family that he's got
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Well, let's face it, all families are beautiful, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. That's for sure.
Too damn bad they have to grow up.
You know, I look at there's a program that one of my sons put on our pictures, and every time there's a substantial number of pictures on any one particular day, it groups them together and puts them in different sizes and configurations, and then tells you that this is an anniversary of some kind. And I sit there and look at the little ones, you know, we've got one that's almost 16 going to second year high school. And there he is, you know, 1 year old, 2 year old.
Yeah.
And it's just, I wish they'd stay where they are, but can't do it.
That doesn't happen.
How are you guys?
Good. Baseball
well.
brought a lot of family together down here in Irvine.
Great.
My sister Mary's grandson, Owen, is an excellent athlete at Morro Bay High School, just graduated. And his summer team got into this tournament. And he got a scholarship offer from Concordia. I don't know if he's gonna take him up on it, but he's been highly scouted.
What's the sport? Baseball?
Baseball, yeah.
Ah, good.
So he's been a second baseman and shortstop for a long time, but because he joined the team a little bit late, he ended up playing outfield and gunned a couple people out all the way to the plate from center field.
Oh my.
So he got good rave. But
Mhm.
lots of my kids and my sister Mary's group were all together for 4 or 5 days. It was great.
That's wonderful. Great. Congratulations.
Terrific. Meanwhile, you may have gotten my email that I'm going to have to be leaving at about 10:15. And
What are we gonna do?
well, you're gonna probably stare at
A
this
blank.
empty room without me. But what
then-
I'm coming back. I'm coming back. I'm going to have one of my daily radiation treatments, which is only about a 10-minute drive away. It's absolutely marvelous having a branch of City of Hope here in South Bay. It's in Torrance, right near Little Company Mary Hospital. And so it's 10 minutes drive away. The radiation treatment itself takes about 5 minutes of emptying my pockets and getting on the table and taking my shoes off. And then less than 10 minutes actual treatment time, of which 5 minutes of that are scanning for just to be sure everything's in the same place that they remember it. inside. And then about 3 minutes for the radiation thing to go around twice. And so they tell me that, they can aim it within a millimeter or less of precision.
Wow.
So it'll be about 15 minutes, God willing, all total there, if everything goes right. And then 10 minutes drive back. So if I leave at 10:15, I should be back by possibly 11, certainly 11:15 at the latest.
Great.
No, I'm sorry, because at that 10:40. So I should be back about 11:15, 11:30 at the latest. So as you can tell, I'm recording this, so I will be able to enjoy what I missed. So be careful what you say about me in my absence.
So
You'll say it all in code.
Yeah, right,
we will be connected and recorded in your absence.
right.
Okay.
And here comes George Crook, so I'll have to say all of this over again, briefly. Whoops.
Órale, ladrón.
There he is.
Hello, George.
Hey, Tom, are you radioactive?
Not yet, but I will be. You'll see me glow when I come back.
I thought,
Like
You are-
Moses, huh?
Yeah, so you read my email last night.
I did not,
Oh,
I
okay.
don't think.
Well, I have to leave at about a quarter after 10 to get there. It's only about a 10-minute drive, but I want to get there a little bit early for a 10:40 radiation appointment. And the total time of the treatment, including prep and all of that, is about 15 minutes, and that's 10 minutes drive back. So I should
So
be
you're back by 11:30.
11:15, 11:30.
Okay, terrific.
So you all can carry on bravely,
Or timorously.
or timorously, however you may want to. As we are now looking at Ned's empty chair, you'll be looking at mine. And then I will be back to occupy it.
Cool.
Be well.
Thank you. Meanwhile, it's got about 6 or 7 minutes to go, so I'll still be.
Any particular topic you'd like to have on the table while you're gone?
No, I'm content with however the spirit moves. You may have seen the email that I sent yesterday about the communion for divorced and remarried.
I thought that was
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah,
I missed that. I'll find it. Okay, I won't waste your time by.
yeah, you'll find it. George Wilson is the guy's name. I don't know him. He was writing in LaCroix, the
Yeah,
that news service, and and I made a few of the comments of my own feelings about how in accord with, there's a lot of people who will say, well, the hell with canon law, dump the whole damn thing. And I think, no, we may need to at least respect doctrine and canonical procedures, even if it's really advisable to modify them. So I give a couple of thoughts about where this might go as far as the canonical recognition, since marriage is a public act, a community act. It does involve the whole church. There is a responsibility with the whole church regarding marriage and how marriage is performed, perhaps the wedding, and definitely how marriage is lived out within community. There is some degree of communal responsibility there. So a question, becomes, does a way of organizing that community responsibility that may have served in the time of Henry VIII, but it didn't serve well even then. Um, does that need to be modified now? And if so, in what direction? So I gave a few little reflections on that. And
Well,
something in the back of my mind seems to feel that this is also related to how we handle certain politicians in relation to the Eucharistic community. Because we're always talking about, and this will be maybe my parting shot. We are always talking about the Eucharist as a commodity that we give to or withhold from certain people for various criteria. And, the journalism about this, the journalistic reporting, I think, has been just absolutely awful in its use of
Terrible.
terminology, because they never, including this particular little article, they never refer to terms like participating fully in the Eucharist. They talk about the communion line and going up and getting communion. The secular media uniformly now is referring to the Eucharist as a wafer.
Yes.
Not even bread. Not even bread, but a wafer. And a wafer, in my mind, always calls to mind candy.
Yeah.
Yeah, vanilla wafer.
Yeah. Yeah. Or those nice thin little cookies. But bread is something that has been lost in the public and even the among the faithful consciousness of the Eucharist. No wonder we're having a problem with symbolism.
Yeah.
Because we don't let the primary symbol of bread speak. Bread and wine. So anyway, that's my little contribution, as it were, to that. So if you want to continue.
Returning to the sacrament of matrimony and your long history in the active priesthood, I can't imagine. I had 8 years on staff at St. John Neumann. How many marriage cases must have come your way?
They did.
How varied they all must have been.
Yeah. And sadly, I would say for most of them, I did not devote the time that was needed to make it any kind of a personal thing. In fact, if there seemed to be a difficulty in, let's say, the mechanics or the bureaucratic paperwork stuff, that would usually get on the back burner with me until sometimes people would give up and go elsewhere, either to another faith community or to another priest who actually enjoyed all the bureaucratic paperwork.
When I went through that process, they were all over me. Remember, Ned? All of a sudden, this nun calls me up.
Yeah.
This was after the 30-page questionnaire.
Yeah.
And after whatever report Herbert did, and after, I guess I had to fire Zeman when, but as my advocate, but and this nun calls me up and from the chancery, from the matrimonial tribunal, spent like at least half an hour with me on the phone, and then interviewed my witnesses. Right, Ned?
Yes.
I mean, very thoroughly.
Yeah, I think that somehow Zeman started some dominoes thing going, and even after he had that cloud hanging over his head, it just kept on going, and the Jesuit that we love so much didn't hurt any to get that going.
Yeah.
I-
I'm going to have to bid adieu.
Okay,
I will come
Okay.
back. I will come back radiant.
yeah. Moses.
Shine on.
Right,
We're already ready.
right. So probably an hour or so. I'm giving myself plenty of time before I leave here to get up there. So an hour or so. God
Okay,
bless. Okay.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If I may, as a transition, I got a phone call from Joe Hernandez, who I think was in your class, Fred.
Yeah,
I remember
Hernandez.
Joe.
And he and I have been in touch and had lunch a few times. But would you remember Mick Tobin?
Oh,
Sure.
yeah, very. He
Absolutely.
wrote me. He emailed me about.
I remembered him fondly. He passed away about a month or so ago after a terrible accident. He was hiking with a family member up behind San Clemente in the hills, slipped and fell down a hill into a bush that happened to be poisonous.
Oh,
I don't know any specifics, but my sisters are doing some research, and poor Mick had one leg amputated. They were getting ready to amputate the second when his body just gave out and he passed away. So God rest Mick Tobin, and thank Joe Hernandez for keeping us connected that way.
What did you say, Fred, about Tobin?
Oh, just Jose, we never called him Joe. He got converted from wanting to be called, but he in fact he wrote me in as Jose.
yeah.
Oh, Hernandez, okay.
And he told me that. And the funniest thing is, the first thing that popped into my mind was Nick running down a corridor and turning around the corner, sort of in front of the chapel in the junior seminary,
Mhm.
and running into Graham, the rector.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, no.
And all I could hear was Graham yelling out, "Boy, have you gone berserk?" And I think I think in retrospect, I'm happy that Graham left it at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a dark eminence in that place.
Wasn't
Wow.
Did he come in your class and give the anti-Semitic talk? About
No,
I don't remember that.
Recall.
it was that whole thing about the Masons and the Jews being more or less the spawn of the devil. And it was,
Good God.
I don't know what inspired it in our class, but I'm glad you missed it.
how did, my Lord.
That sounds awful.
Well, there was that view abroad in the land, and well, I've been up to the Vatican Council. You know,
Too much.
How do you mean, George?
there were people prominent in the church who thought the Jews had a sort of a institutional, for want of a better word, bias against the church, that they had been a source in Europe of influencing governments to persecute the church and to promoting secularism. Right up to, and I mean, I'm sure some of the prelates at the council bought into that. Ottaviani, perhaps, Semper Idem himself, Lefevre was at least a parlor or a rectory anti-Semite, whatever you would call him, and was horrified by Nostra Aetate. Fred, you doubtlessly know a lot about this, right?
Sure.
The infiltrate. I mean, Observatory Romano had put out editorials, at least at the time of Pius X.
Bad. But I think the key thing is how much exposure you've had to Jews. Every race has horses' asses,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
there are so many really good Jews. And they take the commandment seriously, even when they're secularized.
Yes,
The idea of a mitzvot, doing good for others because it's God's command.
Yeah.
I've found that so often to be true in my own life.
I have too.
I
Same
can't
here.
I can't abide that opinion, even though I know uh, there are bad ones, but that's true of every single brand of people. But I
There's
think-
nobody more philanthropic in American life than Jews of Eastern European ancestry. You know, I maintain if it weren't for the Jews, this country racially would have been pretty much as bad as South Africa. I mean, Jews financed the NAACP when it was, you know, just getting started and all Bambi-legged, and they were there. They were every time you'd come to a crossroad and here's justice on one side and injustice on the other, the Jews would go to fight for justice. In our history, I mean, I can't think of a case otherwise.
Yeah,
All the legal aid offices, you know, the guys in defense positions, so many of them were Jewish. Just very generous giving, particularly with respect to justice.
Yeah. Well, the reform motto, let's see, I think I got this right. When the temple fell, there was a council of the rabbis and so forth at Jabneh. I'm just trying to dredge up basic Herbert. And they didn't have the temple to do sacrifice in anymore. So what were they to do? And the answer evolved of tikkun olam, to heal the earth, to be righteous. And that's their sacrifice. And it took hold. Even past the secularization bridges, you know.
sure, that's right.
God, as young as we were during that time, when our rector would have said that, God knows what kinds of twisted ideas we would have had sown in us, and maybe have been hurt for a long, long time.
Do you remember Father Jordan, Fred?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
get him.
he was our freshman English teacher. And in our reader, and Ned John have heard this before, but in our reader, there was a story about the siege of the Alcazar during the Spanish Civil War. The siege was conducted by the loyalists, the commies. And the story was that somehow the son of the commandant of the Alcazar had fallen into the Reds' hands, the loyalists, and he was told to call up his father in the fortress and talk to him. And basically, his father was to surrender the Alcazar, or else they were going to shoot this guy, you know, the hostage. And his father, you know, says to him, well, then, son, die like a Spaniard, you know, shouting Viva Cristo Rey, or words to that effect. And I'm sitting there, and that was 1956. What do I know, you know? And I raised my hand and I say, well, Father, how come this book is glorifying the phalanges, Franco's side of the war? And Father George said, what do you mean, Mr. Crook? And I said, well, Franco, isn't he a fascist or something? And Father George says, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, for example, isn't it true that in Spain there's no freedom of religion? And Father George says, well, why should there be? Error has no rights. And I said, what does that mean? Yeah, what did I know? I was a ninth grader. What error has no rights? There's a phone here somewhere. Here it is.
That wasn't an alarm of some sort, George.
There. And anyway, and I didn't know what to say because I knew somehow this wasn't right what he was saying.
You
But
poked the bear.
yeah, and I tried to argue with him feebly, and he ended it by saying, Mr. Crook, as you go into theology, you'll understand this. And if you're going to stay here, you're going to need to change some thinking on these types of things. And I said, oh, okay. Well, I mean, but at the time, John Courtney Murray, Fred, right, was silenced for advocating freedom of religion. And the motto, there was a guy at Catholic U, I think a Redemptorist, who was like the anti-Murray. And he used to write, error has no rights. That was his, view.
No, you notice today in the disputes among people on the right and the left, you have people on both sides saying error has no rights.
Mhm.
Yep, you do.
And that's just a constant refrain. I mean, not necessarily in words, but in actions, in deeds. And but I remember Father Berger. Did you have him in philosophy?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
did
yeah.
we?
Boy, did we ever, yeah.
Well, he was a little like that too.
Yeah, he was.
Most of the others, I wouldn't have thought of them in that vein at all.
I remember Father Berger talking about he'd gone to some function in Chicago where he'd grown up, and Senator John F. Kennedy was there. I don't know, seeking funds perhaps or something. And Berger, he doesn't know a thing about being a Catholic. He doesn't. And of course, not liking JFK is not the same as being a Francoist, but I can't remember what he said, but I agree with you, Fred. He definitely was stood far to the right.
My son-in-law is from Spain, and he tells the story about the beginning of the revolution, that his grandfather went out with some kind of a stick to fight against Franco, and his grandmother had to go down and talk him out of it.
He went down with a stick to fight for or against Franco.
Oh, against Franco. Against Franco. They were all against Franco.
Yeah.
And they alienated his whole family from the church.
Yeah.
So his grandmother didn't believe in the church, but believed in God. And he said his mother believed in the church, but not in God.
Oh, my.
So that was the grand synthesis of the result of the phalangist regime.
It does lay much at the feet of the clergy and how the clergy present church and God. And I mean, we talk about our professors, but also our mentors.
But the church did teach, even after John Courtney Murray started writing those things, that we're only putting up with free elections and so forth and so on until we have the majority of Catholics, and then we'll take over.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who's he has been the head of the law school at Villanova, and he still thinks that. I couldn't believe it.
He still does?
Yeah, yeah. So I was so embarrassed when he gave a talk at the workshop to that effect.
One of your workshops?
Yes.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Talk. How do you stand up and after that thank him?
I didn't.
No.
But I do stand up and say, are there any comments or questions? And nobody said a word.
Not a word.
Nobody took him on?
Nope, nobody took him on.
No George Crook in the audience.
That's true.
Well, you got to change that audience.
Well, no, I think that was a way of indicating their,
So their disapproval.
they tend to be pretty charitable.
Well, good.
But that reminds me of the marriage thing that was sent to us. I thought the early part of it was great. I thought the epigraph of the early part would have been the reason why the scriptures say judge not is that you can't properly judge until you've understood.
Mhm.
And he talked about what it was like to have to go through a divorce, what the human cost of it was, with people who married in good faith.
Mhm.
Thought they could live up to it, but just didn't find themselves prepared or able to. And I thought his way of talking about that experience really put the thing in a different context. And insofar as people, which I do, who are in a second marriage, who have the children from both sides of the former marriage, who go to church and their children go up to communion, but they don't go. And I thought, well, what does that say about the unity of the mystical body of Christ?
Yeah.
So I mainly thought about that in terms of those kinds of people who had children who would go but leave their parents behind. But I thought he made a case, and I feel like Tom is veering towards that position of the author, but having more further questions. But I don't know.
Yeah, and I didn't know it had come in. One thing that did come in that I read, Fred, was your thing on the precious blood, which I thought was terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. He's a great guy. Every now and then people share his sermons, and they're just wonderful, always.
Yeah, I thought it was quite good.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, you mentioned another friend of yours, the guy you met, I guess, when you first got to Italy, Tracy.
Yes.
I just have to look him up on Wikipedia. He published a book called The Achievement of Bernard Lonergan.
Right.
Is that a book you recommend?
It's a nice book. It's very nice. It's really a kind of popularization of his dissertation that he did at the Greg, and it's a solid book. In hindsight, I don't think he quite understood everything about Lonergan, but it's a very nice book. I recommend it. I think it's a good book to read.
Okay.
What are you guys talking about? Which book?
It's called The Achievement of Bernard Lonergan by David Tracy.
Hmm.
And I remember when he wrote his next book called The Blessed Rage for Order, he had moved into what they call process theology. And Lonergan was at BC when that was published. And I asked him, well, what did you think about that? And he said, that book had me walking up and down the halls trying to figure out, was I wrong?
Hmm.
Because he was against process theology. But I don't think he changed his mind. So,
How
but
would,
David is the kind of, just a short way of talking about David is that when Sue and I came back to BC, we had to, BC was in financial difficulty, so we got no help traveling back. We had nothing but 2 young kids and our suitcases. And we had a really rough start here in Boston. And when I had gone the first time, when we first came back, after we married, and I had already decided to go to the University of Basel. David Tracy paid for our flight back to Basel.
oh,
So
really?
that was typical of his kindness and
Bless
generosity.
his heart. Yeah.
So we're still friends after all these years. I'll send you the introduction I wrote for him when he gave a Zoom talk at BC, and I was supposed to do his introduction.
Okay, please do.
I thought of him. What did you guys think of that marriage thing?
I
Did you
didn't read it.
Oh, you didn't have
uh,
it. It
I
is
didn't-
long. It is long, and I didn't see the comments afterwards by our friend Tom. So
Now I'm going to reread it in a little bit more depth. When you mentioned Lonergan, it reminded me recently, I've been reading some more of Father Barron, and at some point in France, I guess, he got fascinated by Urs von Balthasar.
right.
And I'm wondering, is that a serious, worthy read for us?
Oh, he's very edifying writer and brilliant. Lonergan was on the International Commission with him
Uh-huh.
after the council, and he always spoke about he couldn't get over Balthasar's erudition, but he's a beautiful writer and a very edifying writer. So I encourage you to read him. Any of his short books. There's a book. The one I would suggest you read first is a paperback called Love Alone.
Okay.
And that's a lovely one, and it won't cost an arm and a leg either.
Mhm.
But he was a prolific guy. He wrote a whole series of books called Herrlichkeit. First on God, and then on Christology, and finally on truth. And it's just an amazing work. So he's a mind at work. He was. And I luckily got to be with him sometimes in Basel,
Uh-huh.
because I really thought he was wonderful. I'd started reading him already when I was at St. John's, and really liked him. But he was a good friend of Karl Barth. So
Really?
Switzerland had 2 great theologians, Barth and Balthasar. They were very good friends. And
Time
Baldassar,
out for a second. You just said something about your time at St. John's and how you started to read him. How did you get directed or accessed that way?
divine providence.
Okay, another mystery.
Oh, it's the thing that I was already at the time I got addicted to looking in bookstores. And I came across the book I first read, which I can't remember the title of. Oh, it's called Prayer. That's another great book. Prayer. It's in paperback too, I'm sure. But I saw it in the Catholic bookstore in LA, down there near the Chancery office, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And I was looking at it and I thought, well, this looks like it's worth taking a further look at. And I used to read it for spiritual reading. And I
If Benjamin Hawks had known you were reading there, he'd have probably stripped the supplies off the shelves.
oh, luckily they were open to that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
that was a boon for me. But,
Fred, I remember, I think I remember having the impression that you had read your way into the Catholic Church pre-Queen of Angels. Is that correct?
no, really, when I was in, let's see, I always went to secular schools until the 7th grade. And in the 7th grade, my parents knew that that I loved football and I'd get to play football if I went to St. John's Military Academy. And the people who taught there were Sisters of Mercy. Most of them from Ireland, but this particular nun was not. And we had a big, unruly, great class in her class who drove her nuts. But she was so loving to us that I always tell people that I got loved into the church. I was baptized as a little kid in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but my mother moved away from there, and there was no contact whatsoever with that faith. And my father had died, and he was Swedenborgian, and so they baptized me conditionally. The chaplain at St. John's Military Academy baptized me conditionally at St. Paul's Church on Adams Street. And so that then I became I think I thought, well, I think this is what a lot of us probably thought. That old saying that converts are courageous.
Mm-hmm.
You have the thought that if you really want to serve God, what's the best way to do it? And so that's why I entered Our Lady, Queen of the Angels. And I must say I've never ever regretted it. One thing, Ted Howard's little book that Tom sent me made me realize that there was so much crap going on at the seminary. And I was absolutely blind to everything. I think if I'd have known more, I'd have been really turned off, but I didn't.
I don't think any of us did. Are you talking about the scandalous stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talked last time about how so many of us had Pat Zeman on a pedestal, I tell people, I happen to know many of the celebrity priest pedophiles of the Archdiocese of LA. And invariably people say, well, what were they like? And I said, who knew? Who knew? Who knew any of this?
That's the same
You know,
thing.
and probably they didn't in junior year of high school. Wouldn't you think, guys?
When the thing first broke, we were already here. And we heard a lot about what happened in the Boston Archdiocese. Right.
Yeah, I imagine so.
I always told Sue, my wife, that I never heard of anything like that during all my years in the seminary, 11 years. So I was kind of allergic or something.
No, I think that was a typical
You guys were the same.
condition of us. I remember they were always telling us to avoid particular friendships.
Yeah.
And you know, I didn't understand what that was all about, except that you know,
I ignored that, I'll tell you.
gee, oh, so did we. And you know, in fact, but it was important enough that
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
I know George and I and a few other guys went to see Father Charles Barr. Remember Father C. Barr, CM?
I loved him.
Yeah, same here. He became the spiritual director for most of the guys in our class. But I remember we talked with him and he said, forget about that. Don't even think about it. And we had friends who left the seminary, and that was an especially strong piece of advice that we were given. When somebody leaves, they are gone, and you don't associate with them. And here we went back again to Father Barr, and he said, that's a bunch of hogwash, forget it. You know, so he was always keeping me
Bless his
straight.
heart. Yeah.
Great guy, just a wonderful.
Was he the only sane one?
What'd you say, Fred?
I just asked if is he the only sane one?
Well, he was one of them.
I'll never.
I think Father Reedy was probably saying.
Oh yeah, he
Yeah,
was great. Yeah, he was. No, I'm just kidding. He wasn't.
Yeah.
But he was the one that attracted us, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that subject of not being aware, I was shocked to find out after the fact that John Kenny and I think it was Alzugare and some friends had wired the basement of the major seminary with telephone lines and were connected over time. And I don't think any of us had a clue of what that inside group were up to. Do you know or remember any of that?
Not at all. Not at all.
I don't.
I was involved in a wiring job with Jim Hannafin at the junior seminary. What we found out was that someone was stealing money from everybody's wallets while we were out playing in recreation. And so Jim Hannafin had the idea of wiring up people's back pockets where they kept their wallets, and they just hang them on the door of the locker. And it was the day that remember we had the field day once a year.
Mhm.
Yes.
And that's the day we did it before that. And we didn't go out to the field day. That was the first time in my life. We were sitting at the place where we used to get our laundry and maybe candy.
Mhm.
And we had the thing on so that we'd hear the buzz if the contact was made when they pulled the wallet out. And we got the guy.
Wow.
Wow. Who was it?
Did it get kicked out?
I think he was never seen again.
Yeah.
But his big brother was it was a guy named Ferguson. his big brother was years ahead of us. Quite a pretty good athlete, especially in basketball. Great big hands, strong, good shot.
Was he in Berryman's class, the brother?
No, he'd have been, I think, a senior when we were freshmen.
Hmm.
He would have been in the 5th year when you guys came. Just behind Berryman.
Oh,
Uh, so that was my only experience with wires.
Good for Hennepin. Good for Hennepin.
Right now,
and that's way pre the current technology era. I mean, that's amazing that he
Yeah.
figured out how to do that,
well, he was a very, very clever, practical guy.
to say the least.
Yeah.
Wow.
He used to do amazing things. Like he would, when he went to the bathroom, he'd never go in the same place just to keep his mind sharp, to remember never to just go to the same place. Whereas I think I always went pretty much to the same one all the time. It explains the dullness of my mind. Not aware of things.
Being a creature of routine, maybe. But Fred, you were not unique at all in being clueless and oblivious to all this strangeness of so many of our peers. You know, I mean, it just came as a shock to me when I started hearing about it.
Same here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
I also didn't remember he gave statistics on how many homosexual guys were in the seminaries during our days. At the end of the thing, he did that. So many of them got involved in terrible things after ordination.
But was he talking about homosexuals or pedophiles?
Well, homosexuals.
Okay. I'm misremembering that.
But it was I think it was an incredible number. I think Ted said it was nothing like any other seminary. And I remember telling Sue, well, I didn't notice all kinds of homosexuals.
Well, I have trouble believing that it was not quite like any other seminary, because there were things going on at the Franciscan seminary up in Santa Barbara that was very public, and other places that were public, and I just never dreamed. I during theology, I had inklings, because I was Pat Zeman told me about some of the things that were going on, and I found it hard to believe, but also the way he told me it sounded like he was very maturely handling them, and that there were some of the priests knew about it and approved of how it was being handled, I think. At least that was my very immature take on what he told me.
Well, what does that mean, Ned, how it was being handled?
Well, let me give you an instance. I cannot remember the name of this special who came to the seminary, but he was a very bright, articulate, quiet man, thin. Maybe you guys will remember. And he he gave us talks. So he must have been senior enough that the school allowed, the faculty allowed him to speak And I remember he gave us a talk about grace. He kept saying the word charis. And it was a wonderful talk that this guy gave us. I just really impressed me. And Pat told me that he was growing out of or successfully maturing out of homosexuality. And that he had had a hand in helping him. And boy, this shows my utter ignorance. He'd gone to his
Join the crowd.
Yeah.
yeah, but this was simply to wean him away.
Yeah.
And I thought, what? You know, and he said, but everything's very, you know, smoothly moving on, and it's understood, and that's all I think I need to tell you. And I
Yeah.
wonder if he told me in the first place.
But what was your understanding of this weaning process with Pat?
What was all he told me was that he'd gone to his bed once and helped him.
Helped him?
Yes, and I don't.
And then they sent Zeman to the junior seminary.
Well,
Yep.
that was much later.
Holy, yeah, but
Much later, but you know, I can't understand how anybody knew about that other than anybody that Pat would tell. I don't know why he told me that, but he had completely convinced me of his. And I find this true. He was so generous to so many people. He did things that were tedious and difficult and investments of time. He typed notes for a whole bunch of people, translated Latin, for instance, for Ted Howard, gave him notes of what was going on in class, helped other people by typing papers for them. I mean, he did so many very generous things that I had complete trust in him and thought of him as just a very good person. And so when he told me that, I just, you know, accommodated it into that concept and said, well, he knows what he's doing a good thing, and that's about it. But
and the
later,
possibility it was a cover story never even crossed your mind.
I'm sorry?
The fact that it may have been a cover story
Didn't
may
count.
not have even crossed your mind.
You're right.
It would now,
Not at that time.
yeah.
But
But
why would Pat volunteer a cover story, you know, if there was no context or something?
Unless he was cautiously soliciting Ned.
Well,
Well,
that could-
I later believed that because after ordination and after I'd left and I was working with this corporation as a lawyer and got a very substantial promotion supervising a bunch of guys. He called and he had just been named one of the auxiliaries. And he told me, and I said, wow, I just got a huge promotion too. And he says, yeah, let's go have some lunch somewhere. And we did have lunch. And I remember he gave me a hug that was not the normal hug. He seemed to be I don't know, very emotionally and not good emotionally behaving, and so that just awakened all kinds of wonderments in me, and later there were several other very clear indications that he was engaged in homosexual activity. I had no idea. While he was bishop, I went to visit him in Santa Barbara once, and I was appalled at what happened. Knocked on the door of the rectory, door opened, priest in his cassock opened the door, and I remember this, I feel embarrassed even now. He looked up and down, looked down at my feet and all the way up to my head and then down again, and smiled this weird smile, and fairly quickly Pat walked out of whatever room he was in and saw him and said, "Get out of here. What are you doing here? Get out." I mean, just very gruffly. And he smiled or chuckled or something and left. And I said, "What the heck was that about, Pat?" He says, "Oh, nothing. Don't worry about it. Guy needs to be disciplined of some." And we went and had lunch. Again, very appropriately, but you know, by that time I knew there was a lot going on. I didn't know what it was. Frankly, I didn't care. I should have. So those are some experiences that awakened my understanding of stuff that was going on that was just, you know, wrong, just absolutely wrong. I had no idea that he ordained this South American,
Boy toy,
huh? Or, yeah,
this boy toy.
against the advice of a particular nun that was part of the vetting process for candidates for ordination, and she said, absolutely not. And Pat just ignored her and did this independently on his own. Anyway,
Breaking all the rules. You weren't supposed to ordain somebody that hadn't been in your seminary at
Right.
least 2 years.
and I didn't know any of that,
No, none of us did.
you know, and I was just very ignorant.
Of us,
What'd you say, Fred?
like the rest of us.
Yeah. What I remember, I mean, Pat, I told you guys my pastor had former pastor had written a book, did I not? In which Pat is prominently featured. Well,
Told everybody.
I think I did. Pat was this priest, Father Zach, Z-A-K, was a seminarian at the Major and was organizing a day of recollection for his classmates. They wanted to have it away from St. John's. He had met Pat, who was then the spiritual director at the Minor. And so it came down and asked Pat if he could hold it there, they, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, sure, sure. So he thought he and Pat were going to be, you know, friends thereafter. Pat was very encouraging him to get ordained. You'll be a great priest. And all of a sudden, one night at St. John's, knock, knock, knock at Monsignor Zach's door. And it was Pat who came in and chit-chatted and then tried to seduce him. And that happened a second time. And according to Monsignor Zach, anyway. I'm sitting here looking at his book. It's called My at Me Too Moment in the House of God. and he said when Zeman was going to be ordained a bishop, he was horrified, and he went to the rector of the seminary, and he's very careful to use not real names. So I don't know whom he's talking about, but I think it was Charlie Miller, describes him as having very thick glasses, and said, you know, this guy can't be a bishop. Nothing happened. He became a bishop. And then when he was going to become an ordinary, he went to the then rector, described as a classmate of the archbishop and close friend of the archbishop, which has to be Niederauer, right? I mean, who else could it be? And the same thing, you know, stop this, and it didn't get stopped. So that's his story, and he's sticking to it.
Heck,
Well, you know, I spent an awful lot of years in the insurance and franchise business around some of the most skilled salespeople that you might ever meet. And it just reminds me, I think the Greeks started to talk about that people who were skilled at playing a role, and you would never guess that this person was really this way because they were so good at the role play. And what's the term Jesus used for that? That was a Greek term, hypocrite, wasn't it, Fred?
oh, yes, yes. Upo,
Yeah.
above criticism, but not.
I don't know, but it could be that Pat was on the wagon for months at a time, struggling with this, and I think he became pretty hardened. Well, obviously, you know, ordaining your boy toy, but I don't know. What about his dad? I mean, what? Ned, you had some thoughts on Judge Zeman, right?
Yes, George. Do you all remember Lou Del Castillo?
What
Uh,
about
Fred, did you know, you knew Lou, right?
Lou wrote a wonderful letter to me when I was just the beginning professor
Hmm.
about,
Oh,
and I honestly couldn't recall why he said he admired me so much. And I had no idea what the hell he was talking about.
Oh, Lou was very insightful. He was very bright. He could focus and read and do things that were amazing. After he left the seminary, he put together a program that I think, John, you participated in at one point. Selling dynamics, he called it. But anyway, that's a diversion. Pat invited Lou to his home, and at one point, and they had dinner, and Judge Zeman was there, and he was going to stay overnight, and so at the right moment, Lou was shown his guest room, which he prepared himself for, and went to bed. And late at night, or early in the morning, he was awakened by Judge Zeman getting in the bed. And he didn't know who it was, but somebody was getting in the bed, and he turned around and looked, and Judge Zeman threw his leg around him. And Lou was extremely strong. Well, yeah, what was he, 6'2", something like that, 6'3"? And
He'd
And he-
been a varsity basketball player at Mission High.
right, and he played some semi-pro basketball. Anyway, he threw Judge Zeman from the bed onto the floor, got his clothes on and left the house.
Yikes.
Can you imagine that?
No, God.
This is
If I recall what Lou said. He said we were playing basketball one day and guys were just really playing dirty. And Lou said that you just said, okay, let's cut that out. And everybody cut it out. And it just came into my mind. That's
Who said let's cut it out?
me.
Hmm.
Everybody stopped doing whatever it was. So
well, a certain amount of respect.
I would have said that to Joe Zeman.
Well, he had no words for him. He just threw him off. Had no idea whether he'd hurt him. Just knew that he threw him off as hard as he could. And he fell on the floor quite hard, and he left. I remember I was invited to Pat's house, and Judge Zeman, at the end of the meal, dinner, gave me a couple of books and told me that they were very good books, and that after the conversation, he thought that I would be very interested in them. And one of them was Lead Kindly Light, biography of Cardinal.
Newman.
And the other one was C.S. Lewis book, Till We Have Faces. And I did find them really good. But I was invited to stay overnight and I didn't. I hadn't known about this yet, about Lou. But he told me pretty soon after it happened. He and I became very close friends. He was close friends with so many people, Lou was.
I can imagine.
And it was amazing the connections that he would make. But anyway,
He's dead?
yes, he was playing tennis with his son. He put on a lot of weight. He came home after the game, took a shower, sat on his bed, his wife said, and then fell, and it was over.
Age 58.
Yeah. I remember I was driving home from the airport, and Darlene, my wife, called me and said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Why wouldn't I be all right?" And she said, "Well, hurry home." And I said, "Why, Darla?" And she said, just hurry home." I said, "Darlene, something's going on. What is it?" And she said, I'm not sure that it's a good time to tell you now. And, and that really ticked me off.
Very, very subtle.
What the hell happened, And she said, Lou, I just got a call from his wife. He passed away a few hours ago. And I first I couldn't believe it. And I said, "I'll be home as soon as I can. I mean, I'm on my way, and I'll just don't drive as crazy as you can." And I remember going through this horrible anger at God. I yelled at God. I never had this experience before. I mentioned this you know, as one of the people who gave a eulogy at his funeral in Lakeland, Florida. And Father Lou Franz was the celebrant. And I remember yelling in the church. I was still very angry at God. And Father Franz looked at me like I was crazy. And
You are.
Yeah, I guess I was. No, and at that time I was genuinely crazy.
De vez en cuando.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what God's there for.
Pardon?
That's what God's there for.
Well, absolutely.
It's not
Absolutely.
bothering him. He knows it bothers you.
That was an experience that was transformative for me, frankly, about presence of God and that was hard.
Yeah.
I
Thanks for
remember,
sharing that, though. Thank you very much for sharing that.
I remember I was in Hawaii and you called me up, I think, as soon as you got home. And you were not doing well.
Was I crazy?
You were grief stricken. I don't remember you being crazy, but you were, you know, it mattered.
Yeah. Well,
Sometime later, I think you were doing a lot better when they had a memorial out here in California. for
yeah,
Lou.
George gave the eulogy there.
And
I-
George did a beautiful job of
Yeah.
that. But I came away with a fond memory that somebody realized that Del Castillo's son was about the same age as Louis Franz had been when he became our English professor at the SEM.
Is
Talk
that
about jumping generations, right?
right? Tony was a
Yeah.
son. Yeah, that was Georgia Ann Eichenberger was his wife. He'd been a flight attendant at United and lost her job because the management found out that she was married. So she got thrown out of her job. And years later, she called and said, hey, I'm finding out that some of the flight attendants are not getting their jobs back because that was wrongful termination. And can you help me out? And I did. And she got her job back.
Cool.
For you.
Yeah, well, I did a lot of research and then I called the guy in Chicago that I met through Unical, the company that I worked for. And he said, I'll take over. And within 2 weeks, she had her job back with back pay.
Wow. Oh,
She was elated, just elated. She's a really good, fine person. Very fine.
Yeah, there was a famous airplane crash in a cornfield in Iowa.
in Iowa, that's right.
Yeah, remember the plane, you know, sheared off a lot of leaves of corn. Anyway, she was one of the people that walked out of that plane.
Yep,
You know,
yep. Talk about Providence, my goodness. Whew. And she went right back, you know, I mean, she got right back in the next plane.
you know, just a slight tangent. Betty and I, a couple of years ago, took the train from here to New York City, just for fun, in the fall, via Chicago and Cleveland, et cetera. And then took the train when we were coming home back to Harrisburg in Pennsylvania to visit Lance Fessler, and with this minister friend of mine, with whom we stayed for a few days. Then we decided to rent a car, and we were going to fly back out of Pittsburgh. So driving across all of Pennsylvania pretty much. And so we said, what the hell, let's go see where flight 93, was it, went down on September 11th.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's quite something, really. You're on a, oh, what to call it, a cliff top. The trajectory of the plane was it came in, you know, just missing the top of this landmass that now looks down on the field where the plane crashed. And so it was quite cold. We stood there and, you know, just sort of absorbed it and et cetera. But there were some ladies there who were very somber, and we started talking to them. And they were stewardesses who knew the deceased and had been, you know, served on that flight many a time, not that day, obviously. And it was quite solemn, you know, to talk to them about it. You know, as I said, apropos of nothing, but
Well, I tell you what it's apropos of, and that is they were suffering what Shavira did when you got notified of Louis' passing. I mean, that was sincere, careful, loving grief.
yeah, and they wanted to pay tribute by going there, you know. But it
I
was
was about to predict his resurrection.
I'm here.
He has
Well,
risen,
hello,
as he
Radiant.
said.
Hey, Moses, come down from the mountain.
I don't know about that, but I counted, and the actual time of irradiation, the gizmo does 2 complete circles, one in one direction, one in the other, and that takes about 1.5 minutes altogether.
Is there any kind of sensation, Tom?
No,
That's great.
no. No, it's relatively comfortable, and you know, it's kind of fun to hear the machine working and watch it working and all of that. If you like, I can find a picture of it.
Did you say there was just one lymph node that was affected?
That's what was detected on the scan. Now, the scan has a certain level of detection. In fact, you know, this particular lymph node, had 2 scans 1.5 years apart.
What?
And on the first one, it was not detected.
Yeah.
At least not by the doctor who read the image and produced the results. The second one compared the second image with the first image, and he noted that the lymph node was just below the threshold of flagging it as something significant. So they had activity showing on the first one, but they said it's most likely reactive. Reactive, they tell me, means resulting from possibly an inflammation. But the second one definitely showed that it was a malignant type of activity. So,
is there a PSA count?
I don't know if you can see me or hear me, but everybody's frozen.
oh, you're unfrozen now. Are we
No.
unfrozen?
Yes, unfrozen.
Okay. What my PSA was I'd have to go back and check it out. I don't have record of the PSA level before my 2009 prostatectomy. But while you're talking, I can probably find the recent PSAs.
We've been far afield.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Let's see. Test results. Okay, the most recent PSA, which was June 9th, was the highest it's ever been since the prostate was removed. It was 3.58.
Oh, that's pretty mild.
Well, it isn't if you don't have anything that's supposed to be producing that,
Yeah,
PSA.
that's true.
You know,
Yeah.
back in 2016, it was 0.37. And then for the next 3 years, it rose just a little bit up to 1.11. And then it rose to 1.77, and then to 2.15. And then in 2 months, it zoomed up to 3.58. So obviously the goal will be to get it back to 0.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's a story.
I'm just so, yeah, it's almost incredible to me that you aren't supposed to have that which produces the PSA. Ted Howard has the same issue. I think you know that, Tom.
Mhm.
And Dr. who he tells me is, one of the eminent doctors in this field, says, let's just keep looking at it,
Mhm.
that scares the heck out of me.
Yeah, well, even the best of what I'm discovering is even the best of what would you say, surgical removals of it probably is still capable of scattering a couple of random cells here and there.
And
My-
I think our friend Bob Jabro was a victim of that.
Right.
That he had the surgery, but I had both the chemo and the radiation because they were worried that some of the bad guys had gotten from prostate into lymph nodes. So my radiation was 20 some of the prostate and another 20 some of prostate plus lymph nodes.
Mhm.
And here I am, and God rest him, Jabro didn't make it because the cancer came back at like aggressive in his hips and liver and all that went with it. So
Yeah.
the intermingling, I don't know how else to say it, of the lymph nodes and the prostate probably indicates what's a bit of a mystery when we thought PSA only talked about prostate, and there's something else to it.
Well, as I understand it, the lymph nodes are kind of a drainage system for all of your interior organs, so that, the liquid that fills up everything under your skin, it kind of drains through the lymph nodes. So that's, I think, one reason why it's going to pick up that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And being sort of a drain, it would also be kind of like a filter. You know how in your bathroom, even the open drain gets clogged. Sometimes expensively clogged. So anyway,
Well, I'm glad you're taking care of it.
so it looks like, my primary not radiation, but urological oncologist, feels that at the stage it's in, that the radiation can effect a cure. Hormone by itself, he said, would probably stabilize it until I die of something else. But my dad was stabilized for 15 years and never ended up sort of like Jabro, that it was it was pneumonia that killed him, my dad, as a result of a hip fracture and the hospitalization following that, and
Ah,
that as a result of osteoporosis that was caused by the hormones, the hormone treatment.
Wow.
So
How old was he when he died?
91. So he lived a good 15 years after the diagnosis, and it had already metastasized when it was diagnosed back in the 70s.
Then why did Jabro go so quickly? I mean, I think Jabro, I don't know why I had a telephone conversation with him in which he said his prostate cancer had returned. And I kind of poo-pooed it, well, Bob, at our age, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
They say you're gonna, your cancer will outlive you until you die of something else, supposedly. And like 2 years later, he was dead.
Apparently, apparently they can go from being what they're, I guess, what the oncologist termed it, generally prostate cancer is indolent, meaning it's lazy, but it can turn, or certain cells can turn very aggressive.
Yeah.
And from the way my PSA rose just 2 months ago, it looks like it may have been on the verge of turning aggressive. So it looks like please Lord, I think they have
yes.
caught it in time so that I can die of something else. Whatever that may be.
Well, at least you won't die of cancer that's, consuming your bones, which is what prostate cancer ultimately does, right?
What it ultimately does, that's what it did with my dad. And apparently something like that is what happened to Bill Stager also, Jack Stager's brother, who was the astronomer with the Vatican Observatory.
Oh, yeah.
So it went very fast and very aggressive with him also. So
I have a question, Tom. I haven't read your article about annulments and divorce and so forth, which I will. I didn't know it had come. You'd sent it. But let me ask you a question in the abstract. Why can't the church, when it assesses a failed marriage, simply say there was plenty of sin here to go around, and have you repented it, and then absolve the parties concerned, rather than consigning us to this sort of half Catholic light, of the married out of the church Catholic.
mhm.
Betty's aunt, she had an aunt who was in an abusive marriage. She left the guy. And X years later, she meets Mr. Kind and Right and marries him. But the first marriage was in the church, the second one wasn't. So for the next 25 years, she would go to Mass every Sunday and not go to communion because, she didn't want to go to hell. And I just thought that was outrageous.
Yeah.
And then finally, the second husband died, the good guy. And so then she resumed going to communion.
Mhm.
And, my wife's family.
That's totally ridiculous.
Betty's family is very Catholic.
This
Go ahead.
indissolubility stuff is something that the church proclaims almost as if it's gospel teaching. Well, it is.
There's that.
But it
Yeah.
interprets it in the most pharisaical of ways.
Yeah.
sort of like a straitjacket rather than a support.
That's me taking my blood pressure.
Oh, okay. It actually sounds a little bit like the radiation machine. But,
Back
uh,
then.
but what you know what has always puzzled me is that the church on the one hand says that marriage is by nature indissoluble, and then turns right around and dissolves marriages right and left for favor of the faith or Petrine privilege. And then they sort of qualify it, well, it's just a sacramental marriage that is absolutely indissoluble, but we reserve the right to dissolve non-sacramental marriages. Well, right now they're talking out both sides of their mouth,
Yeah, absolutely.
in my humble estimation. Now, I personally think from my own experience that you could say it with almost 100% certitude. A subsequent good marriage is a good indication, if not a proof, of the invalidity of the former marriage, that the former marriage did not have what was needed for a permanent, lifelong commitment. That the subsequent marriage actually does contain within itself something of a proof that that first marriage, there was something radically wrong with it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And to my mind, then that, how would I say, go show yourselves to the priest. That should be proof enough for them.
The cancer is going, the leprosy is going.
So you know, what I'm trying to do is sort of try to uphold the authenticity of our tradition, but at the same time say, hey, it's not that we're moving beyond the tradition, it's that we are allowing the tradition to develop because we have a new situation that, you know, we didn't have in the Middle Ages or even in the Renaissance or even in the early modern era. The other point, you remember my friend Granville, who wrote Christianity and the Images of Science, which is a, you know, very simple, relatively small book that affected me quite deeply, because the point he was making is that virtually all of our religiousness in Christianity today is based on a Newtonian concept of the world. And Newton's laws, shall we say, are valid, are demonstrably valid only within a certain parameter of, let's say, human dimensions. We find that Newton's laws are not valid when we get down to the not microscopic, the atomic level,
Particles,
subatomic level. And Newton's laws are not valid when we get up into the macro intergalactic level. So we are now discovering so much more that doesn't necessarily invalidate our worldview, but does need to expand our worldview. Does that make sense?
Expand is the right word, I think.
Yeah. And you know what distresses me about the church's policy on marriage is, for every one successful marriage case that is pushed through, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of people who are victims of not being able to pursue a marriage case.
And I think
Uh,
that's, to me, that's very sad. And,
Tom,
most of them don't even try.
Tom, the reason for not pursuing would be multifaceted, right? Or
Absolutely.
yeah, money, knowledge, cooperative priests,
Yeah,
et
yeah,
cetera.
yeah, et cetera. Even the availability of a priest. I mean, in any one parish, you might have, let's say, a fifth to a quarter of the parishioners who are in, quote, irregular unions. Maybe these days, probably half of the parishioners are in irregular unions. And one priest in the parish, and have the rectification of that all have to funnel through him, even if now they're having, lay ministers trained to do that. But it just seems to be too much. There's got to be a different way.
Can I say something about Newton?
Please.
Please do.
Lonergan has a way of talking about what Newton's laws are products of classical method.
Mm-hmm.
Tells you what the law is.
Mm-hmm.
But what you were talking about the other circumstances has to do with probability. That's why the classical laws are always other things being equal. And what you're pointing out in relation to marriage, but also in relation to the universe,
Yeah.
other things aren't necessarily equal all the time.
Yeah,
And so-
I like that insight, because what that basically kind of says is quantum physics or quantum mechanics sort of bends and stretches probability.
Yes, well,
Doesn't do away with it, but it bends and stretches it.
but there's another, so you have another scientific method which has to do with probability called statistics. So
Mhm.
classical law tells you what the law is, other things being equal. And statistics tells you how often they're equal,
Mhm.
which can be pretty rare.
Rarely they are equal, yep.
Yeah, yeah.
So conditions are everything. When are the conditions perfect for the thing to be absolutely according to the law?
Yep.
That's
At
true.
St. John Newman, we encountered many marriage cases where the applicant at our parish could not get cooperation from the other party, the ex,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that they just almost absolutely and permanently blocked any possible dissolution of that bond.
Yeah.
So the other thing, to generalize what Lonergan said, is that the movement from pre-modern to modern culture should have really meant that you gave up the classicism, which always depended on the strict interpretation of the law. And that's what you were saying when you said we don't live in the same universe
Mhm.
of the pre-modern era.
Yeah.
We should have given up the classicism.
Yeah.
In the church. And he says people who stick to classicism, that's a product of congealed minds.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
that's what we're talking about.
Mhm.
That's a beautiful put.
When Ned raised his hands,
Yeah. 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 And then, of course, what always gets to me is you have genuine assholes like Newt Gingrich and Boris Johnson, both of whom have been able to get married in the church after multiple failures, shall we say, of the past, or
you can look forward to further ones.
and but they were able to get married in the church just because of that technicality that they were baptized Catholic, even though no particular what's the word I'm looking for? At least in Johnson's case, no particular Catholic
Documentation.
identity or practice, but they were baptized, and therefore all those other marriages are automatically invalid. All you have to do is show that they were never validated by being taken place in the church, which is easy enough to do. And suddenly they're scot-free to publicly commit more indiscretions.
Yeah, I gotta say, it irritated me that Callista, Newt's spouse,
You think?
was American ambassador to the Holy See
Oh
Yeah.
my
under
God,
Trump.
wasn't that amazing?
Yeah, I mean, okay, you know,
Irritates me too that Biden hasn't replaced her.
Oh,
So I don't know if she actually is continuing or not, or if it's sede vacante. But
Ambassador to the papacy? I mean, to
yeah, the
the,
Holy See,
yeah.
Vatican City State.
and Newt went along, you know.
Oh yeah,
He was the consort or whatever you call it, ambassador's spouse.
now what frightens me is
Mhm.
I suspect there's a lot of collusion between Newt and Callista and Steve Bannon,
No,
just as there is between Bannon and Vigano.
That ups the ante.
And
yes, doesn't
yeah,
it though?
and you know, then we've
Talk
got,
about chain.
then we've got John's friends at the Napa Institute, probably being the one who's bankrolling all of them.
Mhm.
I suspect the Napa Institute is also bankrolling Bishop Barron.
To some extent, Chaput, very much so.
Yeah,
No, Dios.
Kaput is kaput.
Yeah.
You would hope.
I asked my brother-in-law just this past weekend what he had thought of Vigano. And he said he was a hard worker, unlike other nuncios, maybe. He was a hard worker, but he was always on a mission. He said you'd be at a meeting of the bishops and Vigano would walk past you having some gleam in his eye. He was looking for Bishop X or Cardinal Y, you know, and he would just walk past you and not see you if you were not the bishop, the prelate he was looking for. And that's all he said. Well, he concurred with me that that original letter was an assassination attempt on Francis, which it clearly was.
Who was the person who agreed with you, George?
My brother-in-law, the recently retired bishop of San Bernardino, Riverside, Gerald Barnes, good guy.
Sounds like it.
A self-styled moderate progressive. This is
Sounds like it sounds like he's prudent,
yeah, he's prudent. He
but that means not just following the rules.
yeah, he said that. Oh, it's just a story. Several years back. Oh, you'll know, Fred, who Paul Shanley is, right?
Sure.
Shanley, guys, was this notorious, flagrant pedophile priest from the Archdiocese of Boston, who was one of the founders, lo and behold, of the Man-Boy Love Association. Anyway, Paul Shanley shows up in retirement out at Palm Springs or Indian Wells or somewhere in the Diocese of San Bernardino, Riverside, with a letter from Cardinal Law saying, you know, Father Paul Shanley, dear Bishop Barnes, Father Paul Shanley is a priest in good standing. Oh, by all means, give him faculties, let him show up at parishes on weekends, you know, that type of a letter. So what does my brother-in-law know? You know, he does it. And shortly thereafter, here come the lawsuits. And the way he described it, he would call law and say, in his message, write him letters. And his message was, look, I have a poor diocese. I'm getting sued because of your boy, whom you could have warned me about, and you should have. And to the contrary, you did the opposite. And you should pay for all this. You're from the rich, powerful Boston diocese. I'm archdiocese, And he said he could never get a response. He would call and he never answered the phone. So finally, he just said to hell with it and sued him in the civil courts for indemnity. And do you know how indemnity works? I may be on the hook for this, but you put me on the hook. So therefore, you should have to pay for it instead of me. Like say an employer who hires a truck driver who's careening down the freeway drunk or a skunk. Well, if the truck driver gets in an accident, the employer is responsible. But, you can't because of the workers' comp laws. But by analogy, he could sue the truck driver and say, indemnify me. You did this. So he sues law. Well, that didn't go over very well in some quarters. A little pipsqueak West Coast bishop suing the Cardinal of Boston. And he just told us this again. He was from San Antonio. And the bishops of Texas were asking that he be appointed the Archbishop of San Antonio some years back when Gomez was appointed. And he was at something, and Theodore McCarrick said, Ricky, you're going to San Antonio. Congratulations. Ricky says, no, I'm not. I sued Cardinal Law. Raymond Burke, et cetera, they're going to remember that. Roger said to it, Ricky, it's in the bag. You're going to San Antonio. And Ricky says, no, I'm not. I sued Law. And then the then president of the Catholic bishops, Fiorenza, I don't know where he was from, Detroit. Anyway, says, Ricky, it's in the bag. You're going to San Antonio. Ricky said, it can't be. And lo and behold, it wasn't,
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Where are the axe falls?
Say that again?
Where are the axe falls?
Yeah. I mean, Law spent his dotage as administrator of St. Mary Major in Rome at a stipend of 140,000 American dollars a year.
Mm.
Now, should that have happened?
You're asking us.
It was a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
I mean, John Paul, what was, well,
He was in his dotage, maybe.
yeah. Well, he was also blind as a bat about this Father Maciel character,
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as he died, almost, Ratzinger told Maciel, you're going to retire to a monastery and live a life of prayer and penance. I think even before I can't say before Ratzinger became Pope, because he became Pope, is next in line. But
Yeah, but he didn't waste any time on it.
no, he didn't. No, he didn't. To his great credit.
Yeah.
What do you think of him as a theologian, Fred?
Oh, he's you had a kind of contrast between Thomas Aquinas, who was very, very theoretical, holy and theoretical, and you had not Bernard, but Bonaventure, who is more in favor of symbolic theology, and he was,
And Dominican and Franciscan too.
yes, and
Yeah,
he and
those flavors.
Ratzinger was, when it came time to do his dissertation, they were trying to force him to do the Aquinas type of thing, and he just wouldn't do it. And he wrote on Augustine, which was Bonhoeffer. Everybody loved Augustine, and he has always been a more symbolic. But I think two things. I have the impression that he was very holy, and also that he really meant to be good, and he was also super intelligent and very learned in every way. And I'll tell you a story. We had a really close friend from England who, after he resigned he was the first priest to teach in England at a university since the Reformation.
Hmm.
And he retired early because he wanted to, Thatcher was going to fire two of the younger members of the faculty who had families. So Hamish retired so they wouldn't have to lose their jobs.
Hmm.
And so he started being a helper to the Passionists. And one of the Passionists got into trouble in Rome. I think he was a moral theologian. And what happened was that he was being called into the Holy Office for being in trouble. And Ratzinger came to him before the trial. This was when he was on the Congregation of the Faith, really the leader of it. And he told him, here's what's going to happen at the trial. And here's what you have to say. And at the end, the priest asked Ratzinger, well, why did you come and tell me this? And he said, those other people on the Holy Office staff, they want to hurt you, but I have no interest in hurting you. I just want you to change a few lines in some of your writings. So I thought that was pretty decent of him.
Mhm.
And I think that really was a telltale of what he was really like. And so I always esteemed him. I was for Martini, of course, before he got elected.
Mhm.
Martini was a good friend, not only of Lonergan, but of us Lonergan people.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he said that when he worked for the community of Sant'Egidio.
Hmm.
Mhm.
He visited an old person in his lay clothes and so forth. And Pope John Paul appointed him to be the bishop of the largest diocese in the world. And he said, well, I'm not a pastoral type. Why are you appointing me? And he said, oh, I know you are, because he would do Bible studies in all the poor areas with the community of Sant'Egidio. So Cardinal Martini told us, Sue and me, that he spent his time, he said, okay, I'll do it, but you have to give me 3 months to prepare. And during that 3 months, he read Lonergan's Method in Theology in order to help him be ready to be what he was, a great bishop, filling up the largest cathedral in the world with teenage kids every week
Mm.
Oh, I didn't know that.
for his homilies.
Mhm.
So we were a fan of him. But Ratzinger, I think, was a decent person. I know that most of the liberals in my department were upset that he got chosen, but I think he wasn't the spawn of the devil.
Fred, would
It
you?
was hardly a surprise.
Yeah.
that he-
No,
Fred,
no.
would you say that it was would be fair to say that Ratzinger was probably as much, if not more, misunderstood by his supporters, who kind of saw his alleged conservatism as a tool for them to use to promote their agenda than he was perhaps even by the liberals who said, hey, wait a minute, we can't go along with everything.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
Yeah.
And weren't his encyclicals beautiful? They were wonderful.
Yes,
Yeah. Mhm.
I read his 3 volumes on Jesus, kind of like a biography.
Yeah.
And the way his style of writing is just so, it reminds me of Father Cremens, who used to tell us that, in chant, it's like the seagull,
Talking to me now. Yes. Excuse me.
the wings of a seagull, and they come down, and you don't hit a note, you tap it, sort of. That's the way the Benedict wrote, I thought, kind of.
Mhm.
Okay.
Sounds like the Holy Spirit is whispering in Fred's ear.
That my physical therapist has arrived.
The time has come.
The
Yep.
time has come.
I have to keep my strength up in case I have to throw someone out of bed.
Oh, okay.
What a keeper. God rest Louis Del Castillo.
What that meant. Thank you
Um,
so much, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Well,
Yeah, well, thank you.
Good.
Keep coming back.
Will
God
do.
bless all.
now
I
we'll
look
have,
forward
now,
to it.
let me see, we'll have to find a catchy phrase for the 6. We
Yeah.
were the
Yeah.
Friday 5. So think about it.
How about the silly 6? Okay, thanks a lot, guys.
See what
All
happens.
right.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you, Fred.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, well, thank you. So shall I pull the plug?
Yep.
I have to leave for I don't know what the hell, a nuclear stress test or something.
Oh, my.
Fun,
yeah.
fun.
Okay.
Show your
Hope that
muscle,
comes
George.
out okay.
Well, I'll let you
Hope we
know.
don't find too much cloggage in those significant arteries.
Yeah, I hope not. I don't think they will, but we'll see.
Okay.
So
Thank
on
God
that
bless.
happy
You'll be in our
note,
prayers too.
okay,
God
thank you.
bless.
Take care,
All right.
George.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye,
Bye-bye.
God
everybody.
bless you all.